welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the author of a novella that I was just saying before we hit record, kept me up last night. It is a wild nightmare ride for sure, and it is so much fun. I mean it in the best possible way. So welcome to the show. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Thank you very much. My name's Val. I write under the name Valkyrie Loughcrewe, and my book is called Puppet's Banquet. I'm an Irish writer, and I love horror and all kinds of art and stuff. I don't really know how to introduce myself too well. I guess I'm a musician as well. I do all kinds of stuff. Make games, RPGs, and yeah, Puppet's Banquet is a book that I kind of started writing one day, and I realized it was linked back to a very old project that me and a friend started back in college, and then it just kind of came together, and now it's coming out and keeping people up at night apparently.
Yeah, it is great. And before we get into the book itself, I'd love if you could tell us a little bit about your journey to writing and perhaps your first book a little bit. What brought you to the writing life?
Well, I was born into a very creative family. My parents were both animators for the Sullivan Bluth Studios, so I grew up, and they moved us over to Arizona from Dublin when I was very, very young. And so I grew up around like animators and like going to animation studios and seeing like people who'd put like giant stickers of the alien from Aliens crawling out of the ceiling and all kinds of crazy stuff. So really was just immersed in like art and genre and all kinds of cool things from when I was young. So really, I just kind of was mimicking my parents, and like I was never that good at drawing, but like I've always been interested in writing. My mom is also a writer. She's been writing since like before I was born, obviously, and you know I was growing up with her writing books and like reading her drafts and stuff like that. And eventually, she got published and has had a pretty okay career. Like her books are amazing. It's just, you know, it's tough to get to like Stephen King or levels or whatever, you know, these days. She got into like one of the bigger presses, but it was like in the middle of the like collapse of traditional publishing. So, but yeah, her books are great. Her name's Celine Kiernan. She's written some really great kind of darker YA stuff. So like I was basically just that's like making art, just kind of like what people do. That's kind of what I was raised to do. And when I was young, I really wanted to write books. And then I always struggled with it because obviously I was young. I didn't have a lot of ideas. And then I really wanted to get into making video games and making movies. And then I fell in love with making music. And then I forced myself to write a book of short stories back in like 2018. And that was really fun. And then I forced myself to write a novella because I started to understand that like you didn't have to write like these giant novels to be able to write good books that people would read. And I had this movie that I wanted to make, and I decided to write it as a book instead. And when I started writing it, it came out in this like poetic prose, and I just kept writing it like that. And I spent the whole time being like, oh God, what am I doing? But that ended up getting the attention of Tenebris Press, who are the same publisher who are putting out Puppet's Banquet, and people seem to really like that one. It's actually pretty funny. It was nominated a bunch for an award. This book's called Crom Cruach, by the way. It was nominated a bunch for I think the Stoker Award, but they said that it didn't count because it was like poetic prose. But so they opened a new category the year after for poetic prose, as if someone's going to come by another year and be like, I wrote another Crom Cruach. Like very silly thing to happen. But yeah, it was cool. It was really cool getting that out. It was really exciting to work on something like experimental and different, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
I certainly learned a lot writing Crom Cruach that I brought into Puppet's Banquet. Puppet's Banquet's still lightly experimental. It's kind of a little free form, but it's a lot more traditional prose than Crom Cruach was really.
Interesting. Yeah, I really love the form of this and the really close perspectives. Tell us a little bit about those perspectives. Could you tell us about Celia and Martin, please?
Oh yeah. Well, that's you've touched on an interesting thing there is the perspective and kind of the close interiority. But I'll tell you about I'll go back to that after I tell you about Celia Martin. Yeah, Celia Martin are just like the picture of middle class, well, like middle class in their own lives, but born into like very rich family type Catholic Irish married couple. They, went to school. They got given all the money they could ever want. They've got given jobs. They were never raised to have any kind of ambition, creative, spiritual, or kind of like cultural ambitions. Their entire parents' lives was just business and schmoozing and drinking down the pub. And they, fell in love and got married. And I think they only probably had their first sentient thought at the age of like 30. Now, I've affection for these characters and I've empathy for these. It's tough to write characters like this without mocking them a bit.
Hmm.
I wanted to show their lives as describe them as plainly as I could. Like it's a bit tragic, it's a bit bleak, but it's a life and it has beauty in it. Like their relationship's not bad. They like each other. Their sex life's pretty okay. And they're just a little kind of aimless and a little kind of losing sense of what they're doing. Like Martin, he's got this kind of religious sense that it's all going to work out. He's just living a little beyond his means and not doing his best at work. And he's just kind of like, oh yeah, God will sort it out for us. And Celia is trying not to freak out about that because she doesn't want to make a fuss or whatever. And then just they get hit with this absolute nightmare moment that completely fractures everything from them. Or at least that's those are the characters we get presented at the start. Things may or may not be a little different to how they appear.
Yeah, absolutely. I really am very interested in that close perspective, and I'd love to know more about how you shape that and how you conceived of them, because it really, it's what ramps up the sort of the nightmarishness, because you're so locked in their perspective with no outer context, if that makes sense.
Well, I got very into around like 2013, around 2014 or so, I got really into Grant Morrison comics and the Invisibles, and I got into like studying like occult philosophy and psychedelics and stuff like that. And there was a kind of mythic element to the storytelling that really appealed to me that I couldn't quite figure out. I couldn't really quite figure out what it was that appealed to me from the storytelling. And I watched like a video essay where two video essayists, I believe it was Malmrose Projects and Nick Spheres, were discussing Eraserhead. And Malmrose Projects brought up the core of what David Lynch does is that he starts with the emotion and he builds out from that rather than building scenes to fit an emotion. And that just blew my mind. And I kind of took that into my writing where if I'm ever struggling to get words on a page, I'll just start in the deepest interiority of the character and like they're the thoughts they don't want to admit that they're having and build that out into the scene. Now, I don't think I've ever gone as fully abstract really, except in more some of the more like eldritch and supernatural moments in some of my books, as David Lynch like build just absolutely building what's happening out of the feeling. But that's where I tend to start. If I'm struggling to put words on a page, I'm like, what are these characters feeling and where is it coming out? And how is that affecting their perception, kind of a thing.
That's so interesting. I'm really glad you made that connection to Lynch because he is very good at getting you so inside somebody's head and really making it feel like his characters, even though they're all, living in close quarters in the same town, what have you, occupying entirely different worlds in their heads.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
So frankly, I must admit that since writing Puppet's Banquet, I've actually been struggling to write something next. I've realized that that technique, as I'm very happy with how it's turned out in all the books I have so far, but it's actually becoming a bit of a crutch, and I'm trying to figure out like what I'm doing next, honestly.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'm very curious about to see what you do next. So I'd love to, talk a little bit more about revealing whatever you are comfortable revealing. So I don't want to, have us stumble into any spoilers you're not comfortable being out there. The sort of initiating incident that befalls Celia and Martin, not as much as the way that it affects them, because they're both really fractured in very different ways, but ways that complement each other and speak to each other very interestingly. I'd love if we could talk about the trauma that happens to Celia and Martin, and maybe how that translates into different but similar like trauma responses and consequences for them.
Well, with Celia, there's a profound sense of like within her of loneliness because the thing that happened to her is so absurd that she really can't talk to anyone about it without kind of offending them. Like almost like anyone she tries to reach out is like kind of disgusted by her. And so she seems like she's like lost in her life and she wants to like escape her life. But it also makes her begin to take notice of things. It very like it's very subtle, I hope. And you probably noticed more the second time around reading it. I kind of wrote the book to be read twice because there's stuff that changes context the second time you read it. But she starts to notice signifiers and signs of things like political struggles and stuff that she just literally never seen before. And she starts to notice like the voids in her own life more. She's just waking up in a world where like something terrible can happen to you and no one is actually going to help you. She always thought that she kind of had everything sorted out for her. With Martin, it's kind of hard to talk about Martin because I'll say this much, the Martin like that you're geared up for is not really the Martin that you're getting. But he is similar enough. That'll make sense when you read when to people when they read the book. But he is similar enough in the sense that he the Martin that Celia sees, his faith and his sense of everything happening for a reason really affects how he goes into his horrible situation where he's in a lot of pain and he's suffering, but he's really trying to find out why this is happening to him. And he has a sense that there's a purpose, like God has given a purpose to his suffering, and he's just kind of like banging at the bars, so to speak, being like, all right, I get it, let me out," kind of a thing. Yeah, it's a very different, it's very, they're very different take. It's almost like you almost see him almost kind of at first maybe as a bit of a narcissist, you know what I mean? Where everything that happens to him is just all about him and his journey and stuff.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I think the thing that they both share, and I'll talk in like the broadest terms I can, is that they both sort of realize that different structures that they have like built themselves around and depend on very heavily are very, I guess, tangential and fragile and vulnerable. And yeah, and it hits them in very different ways. It's just really interesting. And I love how that gap in their experiences is portrayed like through these very subjective perspective chapters. Could you talk a little bit too about the other voices that we hear? Because there's something interesting about the other chapters and voices that we get and how it gives the book a sort of archival feel in some ways, like you are reading a collection of primary sources.
Yeah, there's a framing device basically from the start of like a someone being subjected to essentially horrible something between an interrogation and horrific medical experiments. And you get the sense that they're like being shown they're being shown or forced to experience the events of the book. And that kind of has this kind of like sardonic dark voice because the book is not first person. It is third person, and every now and again, well, my attention was, you have the narrator basically waking up the patient and speaking to them a little, asking them some questions or playing them some like audio of something, of like the one of the villainous characters, Dr. Bannikin, talking about something or another, and then sinking back into the story. But every now and again, that voice will creep up and it will like poke at mock one of the characters or something like that. So there's this sense of like absolute uncertainty over everything. And then there is one of the main kind of I don't know if you'd call it visual, but like one of the main kind of like motifs in the story is like consciousness splitting. Like Celia's consciousness literally splits in two at separate times where she's like witnessing a scene in a different way. Like there's one scene where she's down in this kind of basement full of these like specimens, and part of her is like physically going through looking at the specimen tanks and looking at papers and petri dishes and stuff, but her other consciousness at the same time is just like walking through the walls and like phasing in through this door to see this weird thing that's being contained in there. Like um there is that aspect also kind of gives birth to another voice that kind of like lies between those two consciousnesses that gets more and more brought up within the story as it goes on.
Yeah, I really enjoyed her chapters because they're extremely disorienting in a way that gives you a very, I think, close experience of what she's going through, at least in that sort of mental splitting. And that speaks really, I think, to how trauma does affect people, because it sort of splits your consciousness in a way is that like part of you is existing now, part of you is existing when the thing happened, and you are like both sort of out of the world, but then almost also too much in it. Like it's
Yeah.
very evocative.
Yeah, it's certainly it's certainly dealing with some stuff that I can't really talk about because it's not really stuff that happened to me, but it's stuff that happened to people close with me. And there was definitely a period of my life, a couple of years where it was just like I couldn't switch it off, where you're in this horrible thing. And the themes of like medical abuse and stuff are certainly coherent to that. Like part of the book certainly is this kind of like acknowledgement of a thing that people don't talk about a lot, which is kind of like the social infallibility of doctors and like almost like doctors like the fact that it's set in Ireland and like that there's yeah, kind of occult essences to it, and there's little bits about British colonialism and things like that is not a coincidence because it's almost like talking about doctors as like the new priests in that sense of just like the infallible kind of person who can kind of get away with anything. Now, I'm not anti medicine or anything like that, but the social structures there are really messed up.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot that's said about, as you say, like the structures that frame medical systems. And, yeah, it's just as bad over here as it is there. And I think that there's a lot to be said too about bodily autonomy for both of our characters, even though that's manifesting in different ways for them. I'd love if you could talk a little bit more about the setting of Inishi, because you've touched on some of the issues that are specific to Ireland, and I'd love if we could talk about that a little bit more too.
Well, Inashi is, I think, frankly, it's the most, I don't want to say trashy. It's the most like schlocky kind of element of the thing because it's just like this gothic spooky island, with this big gothic hospital on it. It's very, very much that. But there are these like island communities in Ireland, and they're not scary at all. They're really nice. It was inspired by a trip to like a really nice island, which had these incredible cliffs. Like the description in the book of these vertiginous cliffs that can like drive you insane is like similar to when I went to this beautiful island and saw these absolutely beautiful sea cliffs, and it totally shattered my mind in a way that was like really weird. Like I had an amazing time up there, but when I came home, I was like, God, I'll never be the same. It was really strange and hard to quantify, but yeah, it's far less political. It's far more like just speaking to a sense of like this weird, semi-dead, magical liminality that you find. I don't know if it's uniquely Irish. I don't really have any context for other parts of the world, but the stories, the fairies and stuff like that. And then if you look into fairy lore, it's very weird. It's almost like fairy lore, UFO lore, alien lore, and go like they're all this kind of mishmash. Like fairy almost was the same catch-all term as alien for back in the day. So it's just this miasma of weirdness, and you throw that into the mix of these kind of like horrible super rich doctors like messing with forces they can't possibly comprehend, and then it really throws a question mark over everything. Like there's definitely an interpretation to be made in this book that nothing past the inciting incident is like literally real, and it's their brains interpreting being caught up in some kind of dark fey court dispute with them used as pawns. Like I definitely intended to write the book with intentional plot holes that with moments that have no explanation for them, with the intention of making the it's almost like providing like soil for the reader's imagination just to go wild kind of a thing. So there's definite like there's definite like interpretations that I want there not that I want there to have, there's definitely like solid interpretations for what could be going on in the book, but I definitely wanted to leave holes where like you could imagine like anything and like recontextualize everything depending on your own experiences. Now, like, and typical of what I've just described, like your question just led to me rambling about weird shit. So mentioning in is she just opened up that hole in this conversation. So that's what came out.
I love that. Yeah, that's also interesting. And it loops us back around to David Lynch, I think. I don't want to talk about him too much, but I do, love him and miss him. That he was really good at leaving those sort of unanswerable mysteries around. And I think that that is like a thing that this book does too, is that it sort of like resists giving you that closure, which makes it linger, I think, a lot longer after it's over.
That's good. That's good to hear. Yeah, certainly. Yeah, certainly. Because frankly, a lot of the imagery in the books comes directly from dreams, dreams that I've had. I've had a lot of dreams about like a creepy hospital where messed up stuff happens. So a lot of that's gone into this book. Some of that imagery, weird hospital dreams that I've had is in the next book that I have. There's a brief aside where they go to like a spooky hospital, which might be the same kind of space as in Puppet's Banquet. And that's definitely like, yeah, if you dive into dreams a lot, you will have these you'll get these images and these things that like when you're dreaming they make sense, and then when you wake up it's possible to write them in a way that it feels like it makes sense, and then you just kind of put it out there and hope that somebody goes, oh wow, this resonates with me in a really weird way, kind of a thing. There's certainly a lot of that. Also, the fella who we kind of helped develop the story that that turned into this back when we were in college, Daniel Rooney. He was a fantastic like scholar of like art house film and like weird academic esoteric concepts and stuff. So he was a huge inspiration in just the general kind of tone and the concepts that were are kind of being played with in the book. I'm really glad I was able to get his name on the book so I can get him a cut of the royalties, which is I'm pretty proud of. Yeah, but certainly his influence, the influence of like just strange esoteric academia and stuff led to how yeah, these elements of kind of like I would hope that it pings people's imaginations and leaves like they'll just think about it afterwards, and hopefully inspire people to make their own kind of weird art, because there's obviously a lot of influence from other, like David Lynch, and I hate to say it, but Silent Hill, I I really didn't want any kind of like promo for the book saying that it's like Silent Hill, because I was kind of like, it's influenced by the stuff that influenced Silent Hill, but obviously I'm personally really influenced by Silent Hill as well. But it's like it's so obvious, like spooky hospitals and faceless creatures and stuff like that, that I kind of like cringe when the comparison is made. But like definitely in the way that I was inspired by that, it would be cool if people could be inspired by this and such.
Absolutely. Yeah, the world needs more weird art, and this is a really glorious addition to the weird canon. So thank you so much for sharing it with us and coming to yeah, our show. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Brilliant. Thank you. Hopefully, my ramblings are of some value to to your listeners.
Very valuable. Yeah, okay. So listeners, it is now your turn. Please check out Puppet's Banquet. By the time that you hear this, it'll be out in the world. So head to your favorite bookstore or website or library, perhaps, wherever you like to go for your books. All right, it's time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.